Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Adam Savitt. I'm glad to welcome you back to the Center for Security Policy for our webinar series. We do this every Wednesday at 1 p.m., so be sure to mark your calendars. To check specifics of the topics and speakers for the upcoming programs, please go to securefreedom.org under the webinar tab. And I'll give you a preview of the upcoming events at the end of today's broadcast. Today's program is entitled, The Fate of Immigration and Border Security Under a Biden Administration, featuring our special guests, Lora Ries and Todd Benzemann, and moderated by my colleague, Kyle Shideler. Please note that you are in listen-only mode, but you can submit your text questions in the Q&A box on your GoToWebinar panel, and I'll read as many questions as possible at the end of the program. This event is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/securefreedom, as well as our website at securefreedom.org. And with that, I'll hand it to our Director and Senior Analyst for Homeland Security and Counterterrorism, Kyle Shideler.
Thank you, Adam. We're very excited about this webinar today, talking about the fate of immigration and border security under the Biden administration. We've already seen a whirlwind of activity on the topic coming out of the administration, really minutes and days following the inauguration of Biden as president. So we're very interested in this topic. We think it's very important going forward. And we have two really excellent experts with us to talk about this topic. Joining me is Lora Ries. She's the director of the Center for Technology Policy and Senior Research Fellow for Homeland Security at the Heritage Foundation. She has over 23 years of experience in immigration and homeland security, working twice at the Department of Homeland Security on management and immigration policy and operations issues, most recently as the acting deputy chief of staff. She also has private sector experience as a homeland security industry strategist and in government relations. Prior to that, worked on the legislative branch as counsel for the U.S. House of Representatives Judiciary Committee Subcommittee on Immigration and Claims. Lora, thank you for joining us today. I think your mic might be off, Lora.
Sorry about that. Thanks, Kyle, for having me.
Thanks for joining us. Our other guest is no stranger to Center for Security Policy webinars. He's Todd Benzemann, Center for Immigration Studies, Texas-based Senior National Security Fellow, and I'm glad to say a friend of the center. He is also most recently the author of America's Covert Border War, the untold story of the nation's battle to prevent jihadist infiltration. Let me tell you, I have a copy of Todd's book, and it's really well done. You're going to want a copy. It's a really extensive refutation of those who have claimed that foreign terrorists have never used our lax borders to threaten the country. So go get a copy today. Well, wait for the webinar to end and then go get a copy. Prior to joining CIS, Bensman led the Homeland Security Intelligence efforts at the Department of Public Safety, Intelligence and Counterterrorism Division for the state of Texas. And prior to that was a really excellent national security journalist. So Todd, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
So with that said, I want to get into as much as we can today with our experts. So let's go ahead and dive right into our questions. And question one really is about this move by the Biden administration to target immigration and border security very quickly in terms of policies that they were interested in enacting. We saw them move very swiftly to reverse a number of Trump-era initiatives on border security and immigration, halting the border wall construction, terminating the visa restrictions program that was erroneously labeled the Muslim ban, and then, of course, ending the zero tolerance policy on illegal border crossing, among others. So my questions, and we'll start with Lora. My question is, which of these policy reversals that we've seen from the Biden administration are you most concerned about? And then what Trump policies that are still in effect are most important for us to work to protect in the days and months to come?
So I'm concerned about Biden kind of attacking or moving out on both fronts, both in terms of lifting restrictions for people who are coming in, allowing more illegal immigration to occur, but then also shutting down interior enforcement and enforcement of our immigration laws in general. On day one, the acting secretary of Homeland Security signed a memo calling for most removals to be suspended for 100 days. Fortunately, that has since been enjoined by a U.S. district judge in Texas. The law clearly states if you have a final order of removal, you shall be removed. So there seems to be, under this new administration, a one-way flow, and that is people in and they don't go out to their home countries. In terms of, you mentioned the border wall, he stopped not only defense money being spent on that, but wall money that Congress had designated for it. And it's not just about the wall. It is a wall system. The Border Patrol agents have asked for a wall system in certain parts of the border, but that includes access roads, lighting, sensors, and other technology. And by stopping the spending on that and construction, just halting, not only is that an expensive endeavor to just cut contracts short, but it takes away these other tools that the Border Patrol agents asked for. So it's very important for any president to listen to their agents on the ground, and his actions just ignore what their expertise and protecting our border and enforcing our laws.
And Todd, what about you? One of the things I've noted was the administration suspended asylum cooperation agreements with a number of Central American countries, including El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. Now, you've spent some time down there recently. What is the effect going to be on the migrant flow from the suspension of these agreements?
Well, the suspension of those agreements tie pretty directly to other Biden policies that relate to the loosening of asylum processes, so that more people can claim asylum and fewer people can be rejected for asylum or be declared ineligible for asylum. So it's all sort of like a part one and part two. We haven't seen the part two quite yet on asylum, but the Biden administration has messaged in a 6-point talking points plan that they do intend to loosen all of the restrictions on asylum, so that it broadens the number and diversity of people who can claim asylum and get in. Chief among those, now we haven't seen the writing yet. I don't think it's been. They're working on it right now, but what they are saying is that they'll consider, this is very important, victimhood from criminal violence, which is a really new and different addition, would be a really new and different addition to the 5 categories that are already present in the asylum law. So in other words, to make it more simple is that not 80 to 90% of Central Americans that come in claim asylum on the grounds of gang violence in their home countries, and are rejected on those as ineligible for those grounds. They don't qualify for asylum, and so then that puts them into a removal proceeding. And under the Trump administration, they were being removed. Now you would be able to claim, or under the proposed new way, you'd be able to claim, oh, I was a victim of gang violence, and it would qualify the entire populations pretty much of the Northern Triangle countries, not to mention Mexico, which is plagued by cartel violence. So this would really just it would open up a spigot like you can't imagine of claims that are being made. Mexicans stopped years ago making the claim about cartel violence because they were like 99% sure of having a rejection. So that's a major change. And the suspension of those agreements down there, which go to, whether or not somebody from El Salvador can pass through Honduras, Guatemala, and Mexico without claiming asylum, and then only claim asylum in the United States, is kind of what that's about. if I could just say one other quick, top concern of mine is that for the first few weeks of the Biden administration, starting from the day after inauguration, they very quietly suspended Title 42 returns in large regions of Texas on the Texas border. Title 42 being the instant expulsion of people for the apprehended migrants for COVID containment purposes. So you could just, Border Patrol picks up the Mexican migrant and immediately takes him over the border. And that has resulted in catch and release, the return of catch and release. They didn't announce this. Nobody talked about it until the Washington Post and the New York Times a few days ago decided to do stories on it and were demanding responses from CBP. I was working on that story before that, and they refused to talk to me at all and said, we are not giving any response about that. Catch and release is probably the single most important lever on illegal immigration. When you have it, you have mass illegal immigration. And that's happening now down on the Texas border.
That leads into my next question, Lora, which is, as we've talked about, even the mere mention that there will be policy changes or discussions of what the Biden administration might do in terms of loosening the rules. Some have argued that this leads to what might be called the Biden effect, which is that migrants respond to claims that there's going to be changes and very quickly take advantage of those claims. Are we seeing on the border now a Biden effect with an increase in illegal immigration?
We definitely are. And in fact, they didn't even wait for the election. The numbers started going up in September. Discussion during the campaign of amnesty. Biden said during a presidential debate, we owe them amnesty. Smugglers use that as a selling point, and the numbers jumped starting in September. In fact, that's the point where the month-over-month numbers increased above the 2019 numbers, and 2019 was the year of the border crisis. The January numbers aren't out yet, but it looks like it's going to be another increase, probably hitting 80,000 for the month. Mark Morgan, the former CBP acting commissioner, says the daily numbers are 3,500 when you add in the Title 42 public health turnbacks plus the getaways. You're talking about 4,500 dailies, and those are crisis numbers. So he says, the crisis is already here. And the Title 42 Public Health Authority that Todd had talked about, along with the Remain in Mexico program, have been two lines of defense that have been very effective in controlling the border, stopping the caravans. And if both of those are removed, the border is open. And meanwhile, Americans inside the U.S., we still have shutdown orders. Businesses can't reopen. Kids can't get back to school due to COVID restrictions, and yet we're not administering that consistently at the border. And so there seems to be a hierarchy under this new administration where illegal immigrants are placed above legal immigrants who are placed above U.S. citizens.
And Todd, have we learned anything from previous migration crises that would help us respond to what we're seeing today? What steps, should we be taking, regardless of what is likely to be a Biden administration response? What should we be doing?
Well, I thought that the Trump administration's policies were innovative. We had never seen, he had to cobble them together because he didn't have a working Congress that could support him legislatively. And a lot of the things that he did were very acutely tailored to migrant thinking, to the thinking of aspiring migrants. Really, I thought a lot of it was brilliant. They understood that migrants made decisions about whether to enter the border based and claim asylum based on the fact that they would be released into the country to win, lose, abandon, or draw on their claim. They were in forever, pretty much. And when they did MPP, which is the Migrant Protection Protocol, the remain in Mexico, that really got into the brain waves of aspiring migrants and the way the decisions are made, because now they had to stay in Mexico, and nobody was coming for the great Mexican dream. So you had people that were forced to wait in Mexico, and then downstream they were communicating by social media. Oh, I didn't get in. I'm stuck in Mexico. And that would make people still in Honduras decide to stay put for a while. And so to make policy based on how migrants actually think and smugglers, how they think, is something that needs to happen in the future. All of these things that the Trump administration did, really kind of got into that, and we need to do that in the future. Now, by contrast, the Biden effect is almost wholly ignorant of, or maybe it's not so ignorant. I don't know. It's either ignorant or willful, that they would message information that would make migrants want to come right now in as great a numbers as possible. I'll just, as a quick anecdote, about a year ago, I was in southern Mexico, in Chiapas, interviewing all kinds of migrants that were trapped down there behind the National Guard, Mexican National Guard deployment. And this was at a time when the Democrats were debating. They still had 8 or 9 or 10 candidates, and they were all vying with one another about who was going to be more open and forgiving on immigration. And those migrants down there that I was with all heard that. I never met a migrant that did not have a cell phone that was that fully connected them to social media. And so they heard that as a clarion call, a beacon to come. And they told me over and over, one after another, that we're staying here in Mexico for as long as we can, because we think a Democrat's going to win and we'll get in. So take that for lessons learned for messaging.
Yeah. Now, Lora, you were inside the Trump administration while some of these decisions were being made. I mean, what's your sense of some of the most important changes that the Trump administration made that we need to keep if we're going to be able to respond to a Biden effect migrant crisis?
So what the Trump administration focused on was bringing integrity back to the immigration system. They didn't reduce overall numbers. We still administered or granted over 1 million green cards to lawful permanent residents each year. That didn't change. Naturalizations were hitting record highs. But what they did do is tackle fraud measures. And so the Remain in Mexico was a game changer in implementing that program. It had been part of the Immigration and Nationality Act since 1996 and had never been used. But implementing that stopped the caravans. It was a quick and visual, real effect. Because migrants knew that if they could no longer claim fear and it would be the ticket to get into the U.S. to disappear into the interior, they stopped coming. And then also a key part of that was the agreements made with the governments of Mexico and the Northern Triangle countries based on the principle of safe third country, which is asylum is about protection. And if you are truly fleeing for your life, you would ask for protection in the first safe country in which you arrive. You wouldn't traverse 3 countries just to ask for protection in the U.S. And part of those agreements was working with those governments on enforcing their respective borders, working on biometrics, improving their respective asylum systems. And who wouldn't be for more countries having good asylum systems where people can seek protection? So these are good policies, they're good programs, and the Biden administration should not just be throwing them out because Trump's name is attached to it. They need to actually look at what these programs are about and the principles involved in law, and maintain these.
One of the worrisome things that you mentioned, Laura, was the focus under Trump of fraud measures, of trying to detect immigration fraud. We recently saw the nomination and successful appointment of Alejandro Mayorkas as Department of Homeland Security Secretary, who has something of a reputation for trying to shut down fraud efforts. When he was in the Obama administration. I mean, does that worry you at all?
Shutting down anti-fraud measurements? Yeah, so he was very involved in, he was a micromanager. When he was director of USCIS, he was personally involved in the policies, standing up DACA, for example, but also accelerating adjudication of cases. And what happens when that occurs is it doesn't give the adjudicators time to determine if there's fraud and to have it investigated. And so if you're encouraging cases to be more quickly adjudicated and get to more grants, then you are granting fraud. And while we are a very generous country when it comes to immigration, and Americans like a lawful immigration system and to help people, no one should be for supporting immigration benefits that are obtained fraudulently.
Todd, a question for you. There was recently a report in the media about 11 Iranians being detected and arrested inside the country who had apparently crossed the border illegally. Now, a big part of your book that I think is really interesting and important is the ongoing and extensive effort by the U.S. government to detect so-called special interest aliens, which are, illegal aliens from a variety of countries that we have national security concerns about. Iran obviously being one of them, but then other countries with either terrorism questions or poor vetting capabilities and things like that. Now, this has traditionally been a pretty bipartisan program. Do you have concerns under the Biden administration that they're going to look at weakening some of these counterterrorism measures when it comes to border security and immigration?
Well, I hope not. I hope that the professional Homeland Security practitioners that are careerists hold sway. They did hold a lot of sway during the Obama administration. These are secret programs that are not public, have never been made public, and so they were able to operate fairly free of political intervention, even under the Obama administration, just because nobody knew about them. That we, as a nation, identify migrants in a special way for special treatment based on their nationality when they're apprehended at the border. Those 11 Iranians that were apprehended in Arizona, those are called special interest aliens, and that was about a week ago Monday. So they're probably still undergoing very intense face-to-face interrogations or interviews, and that their phones are probably being dumped and pocket trash and their stories checked to the extent that they can, just to make sure that they're not agents of espionage or some other kind of troublemaking that the Iranians had in mind. They're probably not, but there should be federal officers that are in the detention facilities right now working them over in the sense of interviewing and investigating. And by the way, I should mention they're called special interest aliens for a long time. The name changes by politics. It's government nomenclature. Special interest aliens. That's how they get tagged for special investigation. But as of a week ago, they're now called special interest undocumented non-citizens because there's a problem with the word alien. Nobody likes the word alien now. So my book talks all about special interest aliens and SIAs for short. So I guess the book is already wrong at this point, but special interest undocumented non-citizens. That's what they are. But what my big issue or concern is right now is what's happening with the asylum processes. If they get opened, if they are, I'll just say, if fraud detection and fraud activity and prosecution goes away as it has under Mayorkas, well, special interest aliens and potential terrorists among them, they take advantage of those loopholes the most. They commit a lot of fraud in order to, they create, bogus stories. They're coached through credible fear, asylum, in order to get into the interior. And, we really can't vet those stories very well at all. If we do away with fraud or, kind of de-emphasize it like Mayorkas very likely will do, or if we open up all these other vistas for claims, those people will, just waltz right in and probably quickly and maybe too quickly to be vetted.
Oh, that's
Well, could I just make one comment regarding the word alien that Todd had mentioned? So in the proposed language that President Biden sent to Congress, it includes changing the word alien, which is in the immigration statute, to non-citizen, because they're painting the word alien as offensive and equating it to words that, African Americans find offensive, for example. That's the tactic they're using. What they're really trying to do is erase the line between illegal immigration and legal immigration and make it much more normal and easy for illegal immigrants to come here and to remain here. But within the law, there are subcategories. Not everyone can just be a non-citizen. There are temporary visitors, there are lawful permanent residents or green card holders, and each of those categories have certain processes for how they get here. Requirements, responsibilities, benefits that are distinct. So to just erase all that and call them all non-citizens it's going to require much more serious change to the immigration statute than just simply changing a word to play their word game.
And I think we often neglect to our own peril the successfulness that those on the left often have with playing these word games, and very often this having successfully won the rhetoric, they find it very easy to win the policy. So I think you're absolutely right about that, Lora. Which leads me to ask you about the current state of play politically when it comes to immigration. And now I understand that the Biden administration has said that they want to do a so-called comprehensive immigration reform move, meaning pretty much amnesty, that there is no real talk of any kind of border security inclusion in the bill. And my question to you is, where is the Republican caucus on immigration these days? Obviously, the Trump administration was viewed as very hawkish on the border and immigration, but that's not always been the case for all elements of the Republican caucus. Where are they today? Do you expect to see any kind of pushback in Congress from the Biden move?
So I'd say it's a mixed bag. And the bill as introduced, and we haven't seen the language yet, but the summary that President Biden sent to the Hill is a non-starter as is, because as you say, there's no border security in it. And so the past attempts of negotiation and debate in Congress for comprehensive immigration law always included border security. So even, you know, your Senator Cornyn's and your Senator Graham's are going to be looking for border security sections in there before they would agree to anything. Now, all of this, of course, assumes that the filibuster remains in place. If that is taken out, then you know, the Democrats can pass pretty much whatever they want. But with the filibuster in place and having to get to 60 votes, they wouldn't be able to reach it with what President Biden sent to the Hill. With respect to, I mean, I'm not optimistic that Congress would pass a bill. They tend to load up these immigration bills so much that they die of their own weight. And I'm not anticipating a change there. There are some new members in Congress that seem to be more hawkish on immigration. Yvette Harrell from New Mexico in the House comes to mind. She's already introduced a bill to protect that Title 42 health authorization for public health reasons that we talked about earlier. But I think what the president does on the border in particular is going to determine what sort of reaction occurs. And I think he's already realized that. During the campaign, he said he was going to remain in Mexico on day one. Then during transition, he backpedaled and he said, well, maybe 6 months. His earlier executive orders were immediately terminating Trump executive orders, and his more recent ones say, well, let's study it. He has said himself, I don't want 2 million people at the border. So I don't think he wants the optics of another border crisis, and I don't think he wants the operational headache of it. Nonetheless, the half measures that he has taken and the promise, as we discussed before, has already had a result in increased numbers. So the more CBP is unable to control the border, I think the stronger the backlash will be for a very one-sided bill in Congress.
Todd, do you have thoughts on the state of play when it comes to some of these questions?
My main thought is that, you know, there's a lot of emphasis on, you know, when Biden is going to do this or that, you know, today, tomorrow, 6 months from now, as though the administration has any control whatsoever over the timeline. The Biden administration has no control over the timeline. The migrants have all the control. And they've already asserted that control by simply showing up at the border and coming over. That forces the policy issue and the policy questions on the spot. When you have, you know, 1,000 migrants that are just pouring over the river, you know, coming over and demanding to be let in, somebody on the U.S. side has to make a policy decision about what's going to happen. And that's what's been going on, is that they're coming over and they will continue to come over at their leisure on their timeline. And the administration has two choices. One is tear gas and batons, or let them in. And so, you know, it's almost as simple as that. We already know that they have been encouraged to come in, and they're doing that. So there are a few other levers that are not in Biden's control or the migrants. One is the Mexican National Guard deployment in southern Mexico, and what looks like pretty good resolve by the Guatemalan government to stop caravans on their territory. But those could disappear overnight. You know, right now we have Guatemalans taking the heat for using tear gas and batons, and they may just decide, you know what, we're passing that up the chain up to Mexico, and let them shoot tear gas and get called for humanitarian investigations and that sort of thing.
Well, I mean, that brings me to my next point, which is, I mean, how much room does Biden have on his left? You know, during the primary, we saw a lot of discussion about among the Democrats about the role of ICE. I mean, you really have almost an abolish ICE caucus among the House. Some House Democrats have gone so far as to explicitly call for the abolition of ICE. And they're certainly going to be aided by any optics of the kind that you're talking about, Todd. Lord, I mean, do you think Biden has a whole lot of room to play with his with those on his left? Are they going to be tolerant of him trying to do anything sort of bipartisan on the border, or are they going to be absolutists on this?
Well, I mean, this is the tug of war, and we've already seen it play out. You know, during the campaign, I'm going to end Remain in Mexico on day one. That's what his far left flank wants. And then he backtracked to 6 months. So again, he's the one that, as former vice president, lived through 2014 border crisis. I don't think he wants to repeat that operational headache, nor does he want the optics of it. Yet he is, I think, trying to hold at bay his left flank, and it's just going to be a constant back and forth.
I mean, Todd, what do you think on? I mean, this has been really some of the instability, even in the United States, has been surrounding this question of ICE. And we saw, for example, the organization of Antifa protests against ICE facilities. There was a terror attack in Tacoma, Washington, against an ICE facility. You know, internal immigration enforcement in this country really is under pressure.
I think it's clearly the result. It's a sop to the progressive left part of his party. On paper, ICE is not abolished, but under the proposals that we're hearing about, you know, what ICE can and can't do, they're abolished. I mean, they'll effectively be abolished. They won't have much to do. Let's just put it that way on the interior. And if you combine the removal of interior enforcement with catch and release, you have open borders. That is the definition. That's the meat and potatoes of open borders. And in other words, no obstruction coming in and nothing to send you back. It's open borders. And I think the whole program of that is a left-wing dream. I hate using the word left-wing, but I mean that's where it's coming from. That it's the progressive left agenda, just almost the way they outlined it, without actually abolishing anything. Or, you know, it's kind of like we'll keep the police department in Portland, but, you know, we'll take all their money away and, you know, all their pepper spray and everything else,
and make their life that much more difficult.
Kyle, can I add to that a little bit?
Please.
The left is treating ICE and Customs and Border Protection like other law enforcement and how they've been treated all last year. They have slashed ICE's funding for this fiscal year, particularly their detention budget. They are encouraging the more use of alternatives to detention, which is successful only in limited circumstances, and moving the authority for that a pilot program for those alternatives to detention over to the Civil Rights Office in DHS, if you can imagine that. And the language that was used during Biden's campaign, was rather insulting to ICE and CBP law enforcement officers, saying they needed more oversight and they needed more training and they would be held accountable. Very much like, you know, other law enforcement throughout the country. It's really going to hurt morale. I anticipate people leaving ICE and CBP because of it, which does not keep Americans safer. And it's just the priorities are completely backwards. Also, the Congressional Black Caucus just sent a letter to DHS urging them to stop detention, and they're using race as the reason for it. They cite one case of a Haitian and go into length about his case. I don't know the details of the case, but the point being that they truly don't want detention across the board. They're using race to try and get there. They also go after for-profit detention centers as though for-profit is the boogeyman. But again, they're just trying to not have detention because then these people can disappear and remain illegally in the country.
Right, which of course is what we've seen with the asylum process. Todd, go ahead.
If I could just add to that, I think also that that Biden can't do these things without some political risk also. And we saw in the national election, historically blue districts all along the Texas border and also in Florida go red for the first time in living memory. I did some reporting down there in South Texas about like why did that happen? Those are all turquoise blue districts down there, always have been. They went Trump red for the first time. And when you kind of dig in a little bit, the answer that you get is that people a lot of families in those areas make their living from federal jobs in ICE and Border Patrol and in the detention facility system. And they were listening to the progressives in Portland and Seattle chanting and screaming about the Nazi ICE people and, disband Border Patrol and these detention centers or concentration camps. And that was a real backlash down there. They really did not appreciate that, not just that, but also they did not like and they rebelled against the almost a million Central Americans that poured through during the 2019 crisis, and the Democratic left's reaction to it let them through. They litigated, they ran protection through litigation and legislative effort to make sure that kind of million migrant march over the border could continue. And the people in South Texas just did not like it at all, any of it, the way that was. And I think there is some political risk for backlash on that.
Well, and when you talk about political backlash, I mean, the other thing, of course, to keep in mind is that we could have a situation, God forbid, like we've saw in Europe over the past several years, where you have a single incident, a single terror incident, can very rapidly change the viewpoints of people in the country. And so, if we have if we have an incident like that, or the appearance of a potential incident, it can really change the whole conversation. We saw that in 2016 with the violence in Europe becoming a major factor for the U.S. political discussion.
Right, and what happened to Europe was kind of a catastrophe that has gone unrecognized in the current era that we're in the United States, which is that migrants came in with a mass crowd flood of whatever you want to call them, economic migrants from the Middle East and South Asia, and terrorist operatives infiltrated among them, using them as camouflage, and went on to conduct the Paris attacks, the Brussels attacks, and attacks that have gone on endlessly for 5 years now, without any let up at all. And those attacks and the border infiltration tactic, the travel mobility issue of terrorist mobility, had a significant backlash there in political backlash, and led to just high consequence changes for those societies, electorally, politically. Brexit got started because of that, and we had military campaigns as a result. I see the European political ideology of 2015 in today's Biden administration and on the Democratic left in the United States, without any absorption of the lessons that should have been learned from what happened in Europe. The same ideology and religion.
Well, I think we'll bring back now Adam Savitt to help us cover some of our audience questions, if we have any. I presume that we do.
Yep, we have plenty.
Okay.
There's been some talk of Texas specifically, but the questioner mentioned California, and specifically if Gavin Newsom is recalled, might that have some effect?
Anybody want to take that? Well, I mean, will there be any impact? I mean, I think it actually leads to a good question about the role of states in enforcing the border as well. You mentioned the lawsuit, Lora, that the state of Texas filed. I mean, what role can governors play, either for the good or the ill, when it comes to border enforcement and immigration?
Yeah, it's kind of two sides of one coin. So on one hand, you have sanctuary jurisdictions, which Governor Gavin Newsom was certainly a fan of, and where you have states and localities that don't ask questions about immigration status, but worse than that, don't allow information sharing between state and local law enforcement and ICE agents because they don't want the immigrants to be deported. But what the result is, then criminals are let out of jail because an ICE detainer is either ignored or ICE isn't notified, and then that person's out on the street and unfortunately too often recommit crimes. And Americans are hurt or killed by someone who wasn't supposed to be here. So it's very important to not just contain the spread of more sanctuary jurisdictions, but to eliminate that type of jurisdiction. On the flip side is like a Texas, where they will sue where they think either a federal law or not enforcing federal law negatively impacts the state. And so Texas has done that along with other states in terms of fighting DACA, and then most recently this 100-day deportation suspension.
And then Todd, you've been on the ground representing Texas in some of these issues. What can states do on a positive side to help a federal government that maybe isn't that aggressive in immigration?
Well, Texas has moved on its own. It regards itself as autonomous sometimes about the border. State legislature a few years ago earmarked $600 million for border security during the Obama years. And that entailed the deployment of round-the-clock, Texas state troopers on the border, plugging gaps, working directly with Border Patrol side by side, Marine, air, and land. And by that I mean, speedboats on the river, and lots of presence, I guess you would say, showing the colors, deterrent presence. But also legislatively, I'm in Texas here in Austin, and there was a state law approved a couple of years ago that prohibited cities. We have a lot of blue cities here. Austin's one of them that would love to be sanctuary cities, and by state law, they were prohibited from behaving in ways that meet the definition of sanctuary cities, that what Laura was talking about, not recognizing ICE detainers and that sort of thing. Makes it a crime if you try to do that if you're a police chief or a sheriff somewhere. So I think that states can actually be effective on some of these matters. But always it goes to federal policy, because in the matter of catch and release, which is my my biggest bugaboo about what's happening, I really think it's probably the most important and dramatic policy change that there can be. That states can't do a whole lot when migrants are coming over and presenting themselves to Border Patrol because they know they're just going to get a piece of paper and be waved over to the Greyhound bus station.
Yeah. Adam, next question.
What other Western nation now has an open border? What are the short and long range impacts of an open border on culture and the economy?
We certainly touched on that a little bit, Todd.
Lots of countries.
Lots of countries?
Lots of countries had, before the pandemic, lots of countries had open borders as long as all the migrants coming through kept going. So then you just become a super highway, and when they stop is when it becomes a problem. Like for Mexico, which its historic role in migration, illegal migration, is as a transit nation. Suddenly, when migrants were being pushed back by the tens of thousands, all of a sudden they became a border-interested country. They started deporting, and it was a big problem, and there were domestic new policies, repatriating Central Americans en masse, forcing them to apply for Mexican asylum and all of that sort of thing. So, there are open borders, countries that are open borders until they become the destination. They get stuck with the hot potato.
Directly related here, Trudeau in Canada welcomes illegal aliens and regularly lectured Trump about this topic. Is there any credible way to transship these folks across the U.S. from our southern border and deposit them on the Canadian border?
Well, in fact, we have a safe third country agreement with Canada, so we would get them back.
Now, Todd, one of the things that on the topic of Canada, one of the things that you note in your book was that while very few people are aware of terrorists coming across the U.S. border, there actually was a terror attack by an individual who came across the U.S. southern border, but he committed the attack in Canada. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, that's right. So his name was Abdullahi Sharif. He was a Somali who smuggled in from Kenya to Zambia to Brazil and then Panama and all the way up. Those are routes that are very commonly used by Somalis who show up with no identification and no possible way to learn anything about them since their home countries have no records or government. So in this case, he crossed over into California and was able to kind of finagle his way through the, at that time, the United States was unable to deport to Somalia because there was no government to accept him. It was 2012. And then he went on up to Canada and got in as a refugee there and went on to conduct a double vehicle ramming attack in Edmonton, Alberta. And he was carrying an ISIS flag, and it was a clear-cut, it was a terror attack in just the way that ISIS likes it. But we never really have, I guess, studied what happened there as a government. We've never recognized that happened. I suppose if it would have happened in New York, then it might have become an issue, but it didn't. And we have lots of Somalis just like that who have been apprehended with rich histories of terrorism connection with Al-Shabaab and AI and Al-Qaeda and the rest, who actually do get caught and prosecuted. Some of them have been prosecuted inside the United States. The fear, though, is that I have about that, it's in my book, America's Covert Border War, is that when you have mass migration events, the systems that we have in place to catch guys like Sharif and these other ones, which happened during periods of relative management, calm at the border, that you lose control of those processes. You're swamped. You can't interview. You can't catch them as easily, and they just kind of get washed right in, just like in Europe under the asylum process. And again, we saw what happened in Europe, and my entire first chapter is dedicated to the catastrophe that happened in Europe with border infiltration. Scores and scores came in like that. I really worry that that's going to happen next.
Sure. Adam, next. Any other good questions?
Well, the question about what pushback exists, if there is any, within the Biden administration. Maybe let's add to that within Dems in Congress. Is there any practical support we could have from that side?
Yeah, Lora, I'll toss that question to you. Any positive movement inside either the Biden administration or Dems in Congress on this topic?
Well, so in the executive branch, the career staff, they have lived through some significant changes, whether, what was in place under the Obama administration, to go to the Trump administration, to see the caravans, and now to return to Obama-like policies, if yet on a greater scale under this administration. So they give good counsel, and they know operationally what works and what doesn't. So we have to hope that the political appointees of the Biden administration will take their advice and implement those programs and operations. In Congress, a Democrat's not coming to mind that is going to be for, well, I take that back, Cuellar. So, but I can name on one hand the number of Democrats that would be pushing for border security and sound policy. They are very emboldened right now for a host of reasons. And so they're going to go for as much as they can, including, amnesty for the 11 to 20 some million people who are here.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a few questions on the cartels. I think the most interesting angle, though, is, to what degree are they driving? Are they like the agency behind some of the migration as opposed to just facilitating?
Great question. The role of sort of criminal syndicates in the human trafficking question. We hear a lot about human trafficking now. To what extent are they really driving our migrant problem?
I think the primary driver of the current beginning of a crisis is Joe Biden and the administration's messaging about what they were going to do when they get into office. That is just primary, and I'm getting that from just scores of migrants that I've interviewed all over Mexico. And once they get in, I got to go with that as my primary source of what the driver is. But I will say that there is good evidence that the cartels, which control especially the Texas border, nobody gets through over that border with a coyote who doesn't have to pay the peso, doesn't have to pay the tax to the cartels, and it's in their best interest. These are going to be boom times for them, and they know it. And they are advertising vigorously. They are sending social media messaging and all the rest that, now is the time, get while the getting's good. And they're going to rack it up. I mean, they're just going to it's a money-making operation. They're going to get their numbers were great. If they were a stock to invest in 2019, I would have invested ahead of that. I'd invest in them now if I wouldn't, but I'm just saying. The cartels are I would say it's more of a facilitation, promotion, advertising going on, and they'll reap the benefit.
All right, well, I think we'll have to end it there. Let me just throw it back to Kyle for some closing remarks, and I'll just do some quick announcements.
Okay. Well, I want to thank both of our guests today. Really expert coverage on a very broad topic, and hopefully we'll have an advantage, have an opportunity to have them back to dig into some of the details a little bit deeper. Lora Ries, Director of the Center for Technology Policy and Senior Research Fellow for Homeland Security at the Heritage Foundation. Lora, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Todd Benzemann, Center for Immigration Studies and author of America's Covert Border War. Go ahead and check that out. I highly recommend it. Thank you both very, very much for what was a very informative panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, our upcoming panels, remember, we always have this at Wednesday, 1 p.m., unless otherwise indicated. Next Wednesday, the 17th, Taiwan at a Crossroads, Growing Military and Ideological Threats, which I'll be moderating with our fellows Stephen Bryan and Grant Newsom. The following February 24th, the future of the U.S. Navy in the Biden administration, moderated by my center colleague John Rosamondo, and featuring Brian Clark of the Hudson Institute and Brent Sadler of the Heritage Foundation. So with that, thanks so much to our guests and to the audience for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your day. We'll see you next week. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, guys.